Hello, everybody. Today I am joined at the UK Games Expo by Daryl Sean Price. He's going to be talking to us a bit about Rupture, his upcoming RPG. But before we get stuck into that, it's a pleasure to have you here at the Expo, even if it's only virtually.
Well, thank you. I am really, really glad to be here. And I love what the Expo does. I can't wait to be there in person with Rupture next year. So in a Hyper Fury one weekend, I sat down and wrote the entire concept for Rupture. Since then, that was about 15 years ago. So since then, it's grown. It's taken different iterations. Mm-hmm. I have a group that here in South Texas that I played with that's the system we turn to fairly religiously for the last 8 years or so. And finally, as COVID hit, the world shut down, and I was working with my theater company where we had no events to go to as a theater company anymore. Mm-hmm. We looked at each other and said, why don't we actually put this out there for the rest of the world? It's helped you so much.
Right.
Why don't we see if it can help other people?
It's fascinating that so much has come out of the world locking down where people have had the opportunity to explore projects that have been half forgotten, or perhaps they never thought that they could actually bring them physically into the world, fully publish them and reach a wider group. And then with so much time on people's hands that they've been sitting at home going, you know what, I've got the time now and I think this could be something, which Absolutely. Is a fascinating way to go for it. So approaching Rupture then, if we start with, I want to start with the mechanical side. Actually, so many people are writing worlds for games like D&D 5th edition. You see lots and lots of source books, but you've got your own base mechanic to go with Rupture, right from the ground up, essentially. So what was the sort of reasoning behind that you didn't want to just latch on to a well-known rule set that's already out there, but you needed to bring your own mechanics in to fill your world? Was that it?
Yep. And I'll tell you the reason behind that. So as a kid, when I was constantly sneaking out to either play Cyberpunk 2020 or D&D, or there was no Pathfinder back then, but there was another system, Earth Dawn, with friends. I found pieces I loved that worked really well for me, and I found other pieces, and I'm like, that's just ridiculous. Why would they do it that way? It's too complicated. Let's house rule it.
Yeah. So
I said, you know what? We have all these things we house rule because we think it's too ridiculously complicated. Why don't we have a system that just makes those the rules? And so I started looking at what worked for me as a player and my groups that I'd play with, and what we really didn't like or glossed over or decided we weren't going to follow the rules of, and started building in those pieces. And so it's a very, very narrative, story-driven system where the mechanics are very easy to follow. It's as simple as, and one of the reasons we decided to make it a D12 based system is because the D12 doesn't get enough love in most games.
That is true. It is oft neglected.
It is. Unless you're a barbarian with a certain type of weapon in D&D, that D12 never gets rolled except in Rupture. So almost everything in Rupture is roll a D12, add the skill, add the attribute, and that's it. That's really the mechanic for most of playing the game.
Yeah, it's a very simple mechanic, but the nice thing about simplicity is it allows a lot of flexibility in your games as well, because if you need to decide how difficult or simple a task is, it's a very easy sliding scale to go to when you know that it's going to be a D12 plus the stat and attribute. With the skill and the attribute.
And we built in a lot of mechanics. One of the things I think is really important is I had a lot of people in groups that started to drag us down because they were so into the mechanics that the story got lost on them. The idea of telling this great epic tale of this group on an adventure, whatever it is, got lost on how many rules they could stack to do one certain thing that may have had nothing to do with the story, but they wanted to show off that their character could do it. And so we have mechanics built in that reward immersive story play. A good one is in combat, there's not a lot of rules to follow. It is, you have basically 10 seconds. Tell us what your character do within those 10 seconds. So if you're an archer who decides I'm going to pull out 3 arrows and try to shoot 3 different people, as long as you can legitimately do that in 10 seconds, go for it. There's no rule that says you can't. And if you describe it well, here's some bonuses to your role, because the immersive story play, you just added more fun to this element.
That's something that's, I suppose, key in a lot of role-playing games. Some people get so fixated on the goal of reaching the next level and getting the next reward and skill up and whatever it is, and it becomes, I was going to say, very sedate hack and slash. There's no real story. It's just the next encounter, and that, while it has a certain simplicity and rustic charm for a lot of people, there's a whole other group of people who it's almost anathema to them to just be rolling the dice for combat all the time. Even going back to character creation, you use a deck of cards.
Oh, yes.
Character creation. Do you want to extrapolate on that? Because that's a great piece. Because normally when people are playing a fantasy game, you're going to play a paladin. There you go. There's your paladin. You can give them the name and backstory if you want. And it's that if you want ... bit that is very much brushed away here.
Yep. And that's one of the things that I found was missing in a lot of RPGs. And I spent a lot of creative effort on that background generator system. So other than just the deck of cards that says, here's the personal events that have happened to you up to this point in life. And it's based on what cards you draw out of a standard deck. And it can be something really good. It can be something really bad. It can be something that just adds flavor to your character. Like, oh, you became a hero who got noted for a certain thing. You decide what the thing was. But it also tells you about your family background. It tells you about the region you grew up in. It tells you about, hey, did you happen to have a dad that's now missing? And oh, that got rolled into your background. Mm-hmm. So as you're creating the character, it feels like the story is already starting and it's really fleshing itself out. We always encourage narrators and players to create together, because the narrator, every single time a narrator has done a session 0 creating characters with their group, I've watched, their eyes light up as all of a sudden the goblin's father is missing and mother is insane. And the goblin has a cursed item that's this and this. And he just starts taking notes. And there's the hooks that are going to be fun to play with.
Yeah, because, returning characters from your past, good or bad, are always incredibly entertaining. And especially it gives you the opportunity to, pit people in the party against each other and see how things go. Maybe a friend for one was a foe for another at some point in the past, and really encourage the group dynamic to play out that way as well.
Absolutely. It leaves an open field to you've got enough hooks to do whatever you want with.
So looking at the world of Rupture then.
Torral.
So you've got a world that you've already started to develop, and it's probably not the typical or atypical sort of world that people will be used to with a fantasy setting, where humans and elves and dwarves are the good guys, orcs and bugbears and trolls are the bad guys. Enjoy, and then just set out in the world. You've got I'd almost say a more grounded fantasy world, I suppose, where you've got empires have been built and the races within them are filling niches within the world themselves, not just affixing themselves to archetypes of being good or evil.
Yep, absolutely. And that's actually one of the big things that I didn't like in traditional fantasy role playing, is the idea of these prescriptive alignments. I don't mind an alignment from a descriptive element. It tells me what your character's motives are. So many people use them as, oh, well, this type of character has to be this. This type of character has to be this.
Becomes a crutch.
Yeah. And I thought, well, if I want to look like this, but I want to be good, why can't I? Well, because the rules say you're always evil. Well, why? Why do I have to be evil? And so, we don't even have alignments. We've got personal goals, because one of the things I've noticed in my 40 plus years of being a human being on this plane, you've got people who are really, really good, and they always have these lines they never cross unless something happens with their major personal goal in life. Like, I'm going to cross that line a little bit because it's worth it. And so to me, that's a lot more descriptive way to build a rich backstory. But coming back to the land of Torral, sorry, I went on a little tangent there.
That's fine. I'm all about the tangents.
So the land of Torral, and the reason why the game is called Rupture is because 300 years ago, a great rupture happened that's still unexplained, that caused huge lights in the sky as the sky tore open, and magical energy poured out into everything. So now magical energy, known as mana, flows through every person, everything in creation, the land itself, the trees, the rivers. It is everywhere. And even if you're not a spellcaster, you have magical abilities, and you're able to channel your mana into the world to create unique effects, which has caused a lot of power to rise within this region, as well as a lot of tumult and chaos. And yeah, we've got player species such as trolls and goblins and orcs that are not bad. Mm-hmm. They're also not good. They're whatever you choose them to be. The Torralian Empire that you see the map of there is an interesting peace treaty that happened between the human kingdom of Thoria and the orcish kingdom of Gultak, mm-hmm. who were fighting for many, many years. And about 150 years ago, a very diplomatic elf came together and forced them into a peace treaty that most people realize is not always as peaceful as it says it is. Mm-hmm. And the orcs rule over the only legal religion in the empire, and the humans hold the imperial seat. So they kind of keep each other in a check and balance. And other than that middle section, there's a few areas that are officially part of the empire, but a lot of this land is not. Mm-hmm. So you've got different species with different cultures, with different goals and the ways of operating throughout this land that basically you choose a personality for your character, decide, hey, I love how this species culture fits in with my personality, or sure. allows me to rebel against it because that's who I choose to be. And here's a rich land for you to create that backstory. And one of the things we were very careful about, though, is there is a lot of lore for you to play with to spark the imagination, but we encourage you to develop. Put a new city somewhere. There's so much open area for you to create. Start to add what you want to see in the world to the land of Torral as you play.
Yeah, build the stories and narrative with your own group and really make the game your own, which I encourage wholeheartedly. Speaking about races, you have quite a few sort of races for people to play with within, and some are typical, elves, humans, orcs, and goblins, some less typical. It's not often you see fairies in an RPG.
Oh yeah,
I was a big fan of fairies and tunnels and trolls many, many moons ago, and I think that's the last time I seen one being wielded in anger, I suppose.
Very nice. In fact, fairies is probably the most commonly chose species amongst our playtesters. They love the idea of being a little flying creature who has their own magical shield as a magical ability. And fairies, actually, and one of the other species that we don't have artwork for yet, but our artists are working on it, the Stoneborn, never existed in the land of Torral until the Rupture. And so all of a sudden, with that Rupture, now you start to see fairies in the Enchanted Woods, and Stoneborn is a race of creatures that are completely made of stone, and they aren't actually born. They emerge out of the side of a mountain or a cliff or some rocky place with this great almost voice in their head saying they've got a destiny to fulfill in this land before they go back, but they don't remember what that is.
To know what it is. That is deeply fascinating for so many levels, especially when you're dealing with a time period that's so short from the Rupture occurring. It means potentially some of these creatures would be unknown in some areas, depending on how you choose to play it.
Absolutely.
Because if fairies are appearing in the Enchanted Woods and then maybe thousands of miles away, your venturing party happen to have a couple of fairies, and people will just be completely baffled by what's going on, which can lead to very interesting stories and encounters.
It has happened, and I'm sure it will happen again. I love it.
Tell us about who this is.
Okay, so this is the Skra. The Skra on the map are in that lower archipelago, and they are a lizard-like race. They did exist before the Rupture, but the interesting thing about them is they're a species that has no gender. They see everyone as equals. They see themselves as chosen children of a great goddess, Siskatha, the goddess of river and orders, and they see themselves as the prized children of her. So if you commit a crime against them, i.e. steal a loaf of bread, you're committing a crime against the goddess and you are immediately exiled. But when they choose to have offspring, for example, you'll have two of them come together. They choose roles. One lays an egg, one fertilizes it, and either one could do either. So it gives a lot of flexibility to what identity you want to bring to this character, because they're born as a blank slate, even from a gender perspective.
Was that important to you when you were putting the game together, to make things as accessible to players as possible?
100%. That is one of the biggest things that I saw when in the Dungeons and Dragons world in the old days. And it wasn't necessarily so much from my perspective a racist or a gender identity issue as much as it seems to be now in the media.
Sure.
But what it was is there was a lot of gatekeeping. If you're not this, you can't play. Or if you're not this, then you're not playing the right way. I wanted to have enough for people to play with that was not just inclusive, but welcoming. I don't want somebody who's dealing with pain in their own life to have to feel like I have to invalidate that pain and pretend like it's not there so I can actually feel like I'm having a fun time in this game. Instead of, no, I'm free to explore. I'm free to be who I am. I'm free to take whatever pieces of me I choose and put it into my character. And I feel welcome doing it because we've got this world where things are shifting enough that I can do that in this world and be accepted.
Before we move off the world, I was wondering about sort of tech level. Most of what we see is, or what I've seen from the artwork that exists so far, would be a sort of standard fantasy world. Are there things like black powder weapons and that sort of thing pushing it onto a more sort of not steampunk, but a more medieval sort of setting, or is it all solely contained within a sort of a more traditional fantasy setting?
It's on the verge, I should say. One of the things you see throughout the skies of Torral are airships, but they're not built the technological way that you would see a traditional Victorian steampunk world have them. So because there's so much mana flowing through everything, you have very crafty artificers who learned how to take pieces of air magic and weave it into planks of wood to build ships. And so now ships are flying. So a lot of the tech that you see, for example, the black powder weapons, we have weapons that work like black powder weapons, but it's not using black powder. It's using elemental fire magic in its purest form. So we do have a lot of those things that people would want to see in a more leaning towards medieval Victorian era, but it's all based on that magical flow more than it is on the technology. There are a lot of, especially in the Goblin City of Deep Hole, you do see a lot of mechanical devices because that's how they operate their society. But when you get into the bigger things like that, it's always weaved with magic in some way.
Which makes sense. When you've got a new resource in the world, people will exploit it in whatever way they can. And if that means then that they can supplement current crafting in some way, then they'll do just that.
Actually, you bring up an interesting point I wasn't going to bring up, but I think it's really going to be fun for people to dig into. Because this mana is the resource that everybody sees as the most powerful thing in the world now. There's a lake just outside of the elven city of Ilsadel that is full of nothing but pure mana flowing, called Mirror Lake. And people have done everything they could to get their hands on a vial, a flask of it, that the money system in Torral is backed by drops of magical fluid from that lake. And so it is drops and scruples and drams. They are coins, but they represent either a drop, a scruple, or a dram of magical liquid from Mirror Lake that the Elvish kingdom has allowed other kingdoms to take pieces of.
That's fascinating. A currency backed by mana, the mana standard.
Exactly.
So I suppose people will want to know how they can get involved with Rupture. You are going to be bringing this to Kickstarter. Do you have a date yet when you're going to be going there?
September 6th. And we're very on track for it. The game is done. It's been in playtester mode. We have over 80 playtesters that have worked on it for a while. We're getting the final artwork done. We're bringing it to Kickstarter so we can do things like print a beautiful copy of the actual manual, create a bestiary deck that makes it easy to pull out a card and create an encounter without having to work too hard. And when we come to Kickstarter in September 6th, we actually have a special going right now that anybody that goes to our website and signs up to get notifications before we go live, we have some nice pieces of content that add classes that will not be available in any other way except to early adopters.
Oh, that's nice. So the website is rupturerpg.com.
Yes, sir.
And if people come across to here, they can see updates and information about the land of Torral, the characters that exist within it. And also there's a variety of videos done by yourselves and by Blender showing things like character creation and some playthroughs as well. So if people are interested in seeing groups actually playing through this, they can get involved here as well.
Yep, absolutely. And then down at the bottom, there's a form. Fill it out and say, hey, I want some updates. And I will make sure that once the Kickstarter goes live, we'll be sending you, it's going to be a playthrough adventure that introduces 2 new classes that do not work like typical classes. And they're the Moonborn and the Sunborn. Just as a little bit of a teaser there.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Well, folks, there you have it. That is going to be coming out in September to Kickstarter, Rupture RPG. If you have a taste to get involved with a fantasy RPG, then this is definitely one to check out. If you have any questions, drop them below and I'll pass them across and hopefully get you some answers. But you've got a fairly active community and social media presence as well, so you could probably just go directly to you and ask their questions with you then, Darryl.
Absolutely. We are very responsive.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. Hopefully next year we'll see you at the physical version of the UK Games Expo and with a shiny copy of the book under your arm as well.
That and probably a t-shirt to give you for thanking you for doing this interview, Gerry.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.